he's not gonna leave out some flashes or some content unnoticed, and I feel like the feedback is really good. All right, so that's far. Uh, I'm gonna take this singular honor to invite you, Mr. Vincent Odong. Over to you. Here. Thank you.
How commodable?
Yes, sure, you're audible, loud and clear.
All right. Thank you, Bert and DA for the session. So I'm a bit unwell. So in case I am a bit low, please just unmute and tell me I'm low. And maybe if I disconnect, just do the same. Okay. So apart from that, I think also if maybe I get to be speaking too fast, just feel free to unmute and stop me as well. Or unless you have specific questions as well about something I'm talking about and you need clarity on, feel free to um unmute and ask as well. So yeah, I guess that's it with the introduction. So I think the schedule and the agenda is clear. So I'm mainly going to be talking about three things, right? Like one, judging different debate formats. Then number two, handling splits, basically dealing with complex debate rounds. Then lastly, dealing with difficult teams and teams that protest. Okay, so before I begin on the actual content, I just want to flag maybe three things that I thought have been useful for me as a judge and that have helped me improve as a judge. And one of those things are being able to detach yourself from the debaters and the teams in your. I think for most people, the biggest challenges is not being able to detach yourself from the debaters and the teams in your court. So certification for any job you do. Like no one would allow you to drive if you don't have a license, right? No one would allow you to act to serve as a doctor if you don't have the medical license. So I think this should be a requirement for all judges as well, that you've read and understood the manuals to be able to judge a debate. Otherwise, you should have no business judging a debate. Okay, so now moving on to the core of the session. So, the first thing was about judging different debate formats. So, personally, I think I've only judged, I think, World School and Karl Popper, which I find them to be a bit similar, or with the ways I've interacted with them, they're a bit similar in terms of the judging philosophy, primarily because I think the structures are the same, except for maybe points of information and cross examination that are evaluated differently. But I think generally everything else is sort of the same, right? So I think the distinction is clear on those two grounds, but in other aspects, I think they're very similar. Maybe if there are technicalities I'm not aware of, because I've not really seen a manual for judging Calpapa. The manuals of interactive read are especially for judging WSCC. So I think given that it is the predominant format, I think the overwhelming debate tournaments actually use World School. So the majority of I think session will be covering that. So judging World School, I think the key criteria for judging World School is stipulated within the manual because there are three key aspects of the debate format, and I think for CalPop as well. And that is there is content that you need to evaluate. So, of course, for you to give a team the win, you have to evaluate whether the content that has been delivered is essentially relevant. So, the content in terms of the active or the constructive argument that is given within the debate, the responses that were given to those arguments and other arguments within the debate, that counts as content. So they have to be relevant, first of all, for them to merit them as content that could be used to decide the debate on. Then two, there's style, which in World School is, I think, awarded equally with the same score as content, right? So it is equally as important as content that you leave within the debate. That is speakers' mannerism, like their ability to communicate, to persuade, body language, tone, like use of gestures, humor, and stuff like that. All those things become essential for evaluating whether someone has a good style. So, for example, if someone speaks very fast, you're unable to hear lots of arguments. Or for someone they're being too low, that also I think is a detractor to their speech. So I think style is essentially the component of delivery that makes either the speech persuasive in terms of it being able to compel you or not, because there are many aspects of style that might add or subtract to persuasiveness of a speech. So the tone equally does that. The speed equally does that. The volume equally does that. So all those things need to be evaluated to constitute good style. I think this is more difficult in some cases where teams are closely matched. So I think most debates ultimately default to like the content of the speeches if style in most cases is matched, which I've come to notice it's more often than not that most teams are actually sufficient in terms of delivery. So most style is never an issue in most debates, but essentially about the content that is delivered. I think the last criteria is what is called strategy. And strategy, I think, is largely about the decision making process that teams within the debates make. That is time spent on the arguments, time spent on constructing or choosing the argument to run. So it means if a team chooses maybe to spend a lot more time in making an argument that you perceive as not being relevant, I think that means style or in strategy that is very poor because they have not used their time very well. So time management that is spent on content that you don't perceive as relevant, that is poor strategy. Also, maybe time spent responding to an argument or where the argument has come from which speaker do they come from, all that constitute to strategy. So strategy, I think, basically entails the process of decision making within the debate, what the teams choose to run, when do they choose to run, the amount of time they allocate to it, what do they respond to, what do they choose to respond to, what do they concede, what do they not concede. All that constitute strategy, because I think it is a process through which teams are able to, I think, make decisions and do things that would, I think, guarantee there may be a win within the debate. So the process of deciding and spending and allocating and all those things, I think it's what constitutes style, which is what makes WSTC maybe called for strategically different from BP, because in BP, even if let's say you're to run your best argument, let's say in the last 2 minutes of your speech, and you do it adequately well, it doesn't really matter where it has come from. It will still be, I think, evaluated in terms of how strong it was. I think with WSCC, it's a bit more complicated. If you choose to do that within WSCC, I think that would look like bad strategy, because it's a matter of prioritization here. You just simply spend your first, let's say, 7 minutes speaking of things that are essentially not the best, but you choose the last minute to sort of speak about them. So it means even if the content is good in that regard, strategy would be a detractor from the speech because it was poorly adopted, and where it was applied was, I think, somewhat insufficient for the team. So it means even if the content was good and other teams were strategically better in terms of the choice of argument they chose to make, where they make them, you would sometimes lose those debates, or teams will lose those debates because of those strategic mistakes they make in choosing where to run arguments and when to run them. So that's what makes judging, I think, World School somewhat different from BP. I think the other aspect of it might be in terms of that speaker roles. Like, I think there are definite roles that is assigned to speakers in WSCC, and being able to fulfill them also contribute to maybe you being strategically good. Like, for example, how responsive your third speakers were, how adequately did they weigh the debate, did they have new matter within their speeches, if they did, were they flagged. All those things are constantly areas of evaluations within the ESCC that are not essentially um, within BP as well, though they share similarities in terms of maybe third speakers and whip speakers, or maybe that is other similarity that would exist. But essentially, it means the major contention within WSCC is that they are looking at your style, they are looking at your content, they are looking at your strategy. All these things contribute to you winning the debate, which is not the case with BP, though they share similarities as well. So I think generally that's what makes WSCC different from BP. Generally, I don't think they require different skill sets from what I've already said. Basically, you still have to evaluate the debate in terms of the relevance that is given there. So you're tracking everything that is made within the debate. It's just that there are these additional criteria you have to use to evaluate the debate basing on how the debates went. That's what makes, I think, WSTC and maybe Cowpop somewhat different from BP. So moving on to BP, I think BP, it's somewhat complicated and complex for most novice judges, primarily because of the number of teams that are in it. So, for example, in BP, you are required to evaluate contributions that we call them extensions in BP differently from contributions that are made already in top half, right? So it means I think there needs to be a level of concentration that is distinct from the concentrations we have for World School and Cowpop. This is why it is the case. So with the BP, because teams are evaluated distinctly from the other, so because opening government and closing governments are two different teams, opening opposition and closing oppositions are two different teams. So there has to be a mechanism for differentiating those two teams even if, let's say, the content was the same. So it means your tracking has to be, I think, spot on to be able to do this. I think the most frustrating thing with judging BP, and this is something I've experienced as well, is that it's often dissatisfying when judges just simply tells you your derivative without necessarily telling you why your derivative, right? Like you might have said something that your opening has said, but it had some addition to it, but they just simply say this was derivative without necessarily explaining how derivative it was. So it means that your tracking of this debate should be, I think, more critical than you would do in world school, because in world school, yeah, first speaker speaks, there's some content that might be similar that is made within second speech. I think ultimately you can use that as the same argument to evaluate them against the other teams. With BP, it's not the case, because the mistakes some judges make is that there is content that comes from opening government that is beating, let's say, closing opposition, but it's not coming from closing government. And sometimes judges would credit that to closing government. They say government has said this, therefore it is closing. But that is not something that comes from closing government. So you can't be using that to weigh it with closing opposition. So the complexity of the format itself, I think I would advise that for most novice people, it's, I think it's really advisable not to rush into judging it. So I think the best advice here would be try to do maybe paneling and training in these tournaments so that you get the grip of the format, so that it allows you to sort of be able to understand how the format works without necessarily being thrust into the adjudication of things that is complicated, because you have to give oral adjudication that is, I think, nuanced in terms of being able to explain all the contribution that is given by each team and how it interacts with other different teams. Because, first of all, in opening up, you have to evaluate it differently, right? So you have to be able to explain why opening government is beating the opening opposition. You have to be able to explain why opening government is beating closing opposition. You have to be explaining why opening government is beating closing government. So I think that is something that is not easy for someone that has not been doing it for a while. So it becomes difficult them to do so. So it means that I think try to gain more experience in terms of um paneling, winning this tournament, to make sure that you are competent enough to be able to make those evaluations in such debates. I think with that said, I don't know how much was covered before, but I think the difficult thing within BP is the extensions, right? Either, like I already pointed out earlier, there is recency bias that some judges have for closing teams, or the other way around, like they just assume the derivative and lose concentration. So evaluating extension often becomes the most difficult. For example, some people think an example that is added by closing team is sufficient to warrant they may be ranking above the opening, which is not the case. Or some people would say that is not sufficient. So some people would say an impact that is made by closing team that is essentially not made by opening is sufficient to win over the debate and stuff like that. So it depends on, I think, how well you are able to evaluate, I think, extension and being able to weigh them with contributions that are made in top half that would make you a better judge, because this is where complexities come in. So how do you evaluate extension? So I think first of all, like I already said, you have to be understanding and knowing the format and the manual, what it requires you to be able to evaluate these extensions. So if you have not read the debate manuals, obviously you can't do this. So for example, it is explicit within the debate manual that you cannot credit um you cannot credit policy extensions from closing team. That is to say, government has a policy and closing team decide to say, no, this is how we are doing this policy. We are not doing it exactly like opening house said. So you need to be knowing what are the rules that govern this approach to debating. So you would know that that is not valid because the manual says explicitly that it cannot be an extension that you credit. Firstly, because that is an engagement that already excludes top half, so it can't be a fair debate for top half to participate in. So that's why it is illegal within that debate. I think secondly, just because something is new within the debate, it doesn't automatically mean it is winning the debate, right? So it means an extension, like it said in the manual, it's something that is new. It being new has to be compared with what happens in opening house. So that is to say, what is the strength of this contribution that is new versus the strength of argument that were already made by top half. So that evaluation need to be made, and it's best then weighed in terms of how impactful it is in the round in terms of proving the burden of emotion. So that has to be something that you evaluate, making sure that you're not just crediting something just because it was new, right? And that is something that becomes important. Maybe also responses. Sometimes I think in BP it's actually allowed for responses to contribute to the matter of extension that is given. So that is to say, a team might not explicitly have new material within the debate, but they have better responses, better rebuttals to opposing teams. And in some cases, if those responses are better at taking down arguments from opposition, in certain instances, they may be able to win the debate because of that. They lack positive matter, but they have a lot of good responses to the opposing team within the debate. So I think this is what then requires you to be able to have experience in evaluating this kind of matter. So that is when you decide, okay, these responses contrast to what we get from opening government in terms of positive material. Opening government has not been very responsive, maybe because they are opposition and they can only respond to opening opposition and one speaker only. Whereas in closing government, you have two speakers that have the ability to respond to both teams, right? Opening opposition and closing opposition. So by comparing these responses versus the positive material we get from opening government, which one is better and what makes it better? So the evaluation of that is based on how well does it prove the burden of the motion and how well is it um, engaging within other content within the debate. So that is a judgment call that you need to be able to make. That because you have the experience and you're flowing within the debate. So these are technicalities that are required of you to understand extension to make sure that you're evaluating the debates fairly, not majorly based on you being biased because you think new material equals winning extension, right? Or like just hearing phrases that might be similar and just conclude that, oh, this is derivative of opening without necessarily evaluating the contribution themselves. Something might sound similar, and this is something that teams have adopted to do. Sometimes they seem similar, but there are a lot of fine differences in terms of explanation and in terms of impact. And if, let's say, some teams are not very good at explaining those things, that is to say, the whip speakers often weigh the debate, right? And they are the people that make clarities in such debates, so to differentiate why is this material different from this material. So it means a judge should be able to, I think, make those distinctions without necessarily requiring speakers to do that. I know it's counterintuitive, but I think most judges would just expect in every debate round they go to, speakers should do that. So you hear always like, you did not weigh your contribution with your opening. So I don't know why this material is good or it matters. Like I think for my case, I feel like that's also comes with not being a good judge or not being a fair judge. So just simply because a speaker does not explicitly make those way up, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should just dismiss the content because they did not do that, or you can't just simply say your opening beats you because of this. Because, like I said, you are there to evaluate the debate, pressing on the contributions of teams that are made. So it means testing the relevance of each material, I think, is also up to the judge to be able to determine that. So I think that's with judging BP, and what makes it difficult are those things in my experience, and overcoming them I think would make you a better judge. Maybe also maybe polishing on OA and how you choose to approach it. I think that might have been covered already, so I'll not dwell on that so much. But I think in in my experience, so many times you can see the debate clearly and able to evaluate it clearly, but being able to explain them might be somewhat difficult when you start. So I think practicing giving OA and being able to polish your oral adjudication would, I think push you to becoming a better judge than just being able to judge debates plainly because you know the rules, you can evaluate because you may be very good at evaluating the debate, understanding all the mechanism, but if you cannot give OA, that is a big negative because being able to explain the call in ways that is satisfactory to most teams within the debate, that is what matters most. And I think that's key. So polishing on it would make you a good judge in that regard. So unless there are specific questions, I'm moving on to the second thing, which is handling, I think, split decisions and complex debate, stuff like that. Any questions? Okay, so handling split decision, complex debate. So I think this is fairly straightforward. It simply means these debates are difficult. Difficult, I think, primarily in two ways. Firstly, the debate might be very messy. So both teams are problematic, so they have made mistakes within the debate, and this makes the debate complicated. Or teams are very good, and every contribution within the debate is actually very good, and they are matched on content and every other area of, I think, evaluations within the debate. So this means that the round is very hard to judge. One, because teams are terrible, or two, teams are very good. Everyone has done their job sufficiently. I think there are three things that I think are essential in coming to a decision that is sufficient. I think there's a caveat to this that I might give. In most cases, if it is a top room or that room that is terrible, most of the decisions within these debate rooms, I think, are never unanimous. That is to say, most people never come to an agreement on what they think was valuable or what team they think won the debate and agree that there's a consensus that indeed this team has won the debate simply because of the content that is in those debates are very good or very bad. So it becomes somewhat subjective in that regard. So I think the only way to overcome this in most cases is to have a diversity of people within the panel. But I think then generally how you overcome that, I think first of all, the most important thing is in most cases we try to reconstruct the debate chronologically. That is to say, we build the debate from top to bottom so that we know and adequately, I think, attribute contributions that are made by a specific team to a specific team so that we are all seeing the debate the same way, that we're giving credit where it is due, contributions where they come from. So it means that we're trying to remove um, misconceptions or gaps in logic, whether people are just filling in logic that was not there, or people just simply didn't listen or miss out on some contribution. So we just want to understand that we are crediting teams with the actual content they deliver within the debate without subtraction or addition of content from the judges and their own personal experiences. That is key because it then ensures that we understand where everyone is coming from in terms of why they choose to vote for the team they're choosing to vote for. I think that is key. So in most cases, yeah, chair do that sort of reconstruct the debate so that everyone agrees that yes, this team said this, and yeah, we agree that's what they said, and this is what their contribution was. It is key to understand that. I think it's very important to get that consensus on the contribution. That is not to say that you want everyone to um I don't know, like speak up their mind and blah blah blah. You just want people to credit him with whatever they delivered in the debate without them being able to, I think, fill in the logical gaps that were necessarily missing. I think, too, you then want to agree on a criteria for evaluating the debate, given you've, I think, reconstructed the debate, you've ensured that we are crediting teams with whatever they delivered within the debate. So then we are trying now to evaluate how are we going to judge this debate. Is it based on the principle that made within the debate? Is it based on pragmatics and I think somewhat responses and role fulfillment and stuff like that? Because like debates, sometimes people view them differently, right? Some people might think the principles are more important in that regard. Some people might think the pragmatics are more important in that regard. So this is what makes judgment somewhat subjective. So agreeing on these criteria on where you think we should evaluate the debate becomes somewhat important because this is what will lead you to maybe come to a consensus or maybe come to a split decision at the end of the day. So if then you agree on the material that is delivered by each team, then two, you agree on the criteria to evaluate the debate, then I think the last thing would be maybe then either then you come to a consensus on which criteria is the most important thing to be evaluated or to consider the debate on, and this is where I say that people never agree on these things, and that's why then it is okay for people to be able to be comfortable with whatever call that is made within the third round. So people should be happy to vote. And this goes back to the first thing I said that detaching yourself from the teams within the debate becomes important because for some people, and this is why deliberations delay, um, somewhat it feels unjust because the team that you think has won the debate maybe is not winning the debate because you're getting outvoted. And people take it personal. They want to delay the discussion or make it last for an hour so that they can get a consensus. So they'd want to flip someone because they feel the team that they think has won the debate should win the debate. And I think that is bad because it delays the tournament and also it makes that the diversion seem somewhat unfair. Like I think there are many terms of how this conspiracy theory, another debate that being had. So this is the problem with such discussion because um it makes it look like maybe people are not being professional and that's bad. So I think people should, first of all, respect other judges to the extent that they allow them to have their own opinion, have their own say, because their understanding of the faith is based on things that are legitimate. Because if you agreed on criteria to evaluate the debate, then you have to agree that the other people are competent enough also to have those criteria with them with which they choose to see the debate, right? So you should um have respect for other judges within that panel and respect their decision. And that's why voting becomes crucial because you can't convince everyone to see the debate you think you saw the debate. So it's important in this regard because it then allows for this discussion to flow smoothly because the goal is not to flip everyone within the panel. The goal is to making sure that we are crediting teams with whatever they made within the debate and we're evaluating whether those contributions were important to the debate. If a judge thinks that one of their contribution was not, another thinks it was, it's fine. And that's why you have a panel and that's why voting is allowed and it is part of the rule. So it means being able to vote is essentially something that is key. So detach yourself from the teams, and yeah, even if the team we think has lost, has won the debate, shouldn't have won the debate, but you get outvoted, that should be fine because that's the nature of debate, and you can't sway every single person within that panel. So it should be some that is a process you should be following. So I'll just reiterate, the goal is not to get a consensus every time. It's just to make sure that we are crediting teams with the actual contributions that are made within the debate. We are not filling in gaps for them. We are not finishing logic for them. We are not um, being biased because we feel that they deserve it or they're our friends. So it means one, you need to chronologically reconstruct the debate. That is to say, build the debate from the ground up, to make sure that everyone's contribution is exactly how they did within the debate. Two, agreeing on a criteria on which you think the debate should be evaluated on. And lastly, vote where necessary because you're not going to be able to convince everything every single time. So this means, yeah, you should be respecting members of the panel, and yeah, you don't assume like maybe you're the smartest guy in the room that has to convince everyone every single time. Or maybe you're the most experienced person, everything you say is always right all the time and stuff like that. So I think yeah, it just boils down to how much you respect people on that panel and give them the liberty to make their choices and be comfortable with it. And don't feel attached to the team. Make sure that you are actively evaluating the debate on the merit of the debate, not on what you think is important to you as a child. So I think with that said, I will move on to the last item on the list, and that is dealing with difficult themes. Okay, so as a judge, I've experienced this not very many times, but a few times, and the many times and a few times I've done it. Um, I think not all of them were resolved. Some of them leave the tournament unsatisfied, and that's okay because you're not able to convince everyone. So the first thing I think that is key to dealing with difficult things is one, being respectful of their grievances. I think the problem, and this is a general problem with most judges, is that the first thing they want to do is prove to the teams or to people that they are right. So they want to say, you guys are just being sore losers or something of that sort. You guys don't understand the page or this and that and that. I think that makes it very difficult for teams to want to agree with you because you're creating sort of a bias and a barrier between you and the team. So the first thing you need to do is to be respectful of their grievances. So to understand that yeah, their concern is valid, and if possible, try to make them see the debate the way you saw it in a respectful manner. If they're indeed willing to understand, then they would be willing to be persuaded by your input and how you saw the debate, and they should be able to accept it. Some people do, some others don't. But being disrespectful only escalates the situation, and I think we all know why that becomes terrible. So first thing, try to be respectful. In most cases, I think it's easier to de-escalate the situation when everyone is calm, when everyone is respectful of the other. So I think that is something that I would acknowledge as well. That is key to understanding and dealing with difficult themes. I think too, being able to apologize when necessary is also key because I think being able to acknowledge that the way you see the debate as a judge may not the way other people see the debate. So I think being genuine to the extent that you know that I might have seen the debate differently, you might have seen the debate differently, and recognizing, yeah, you could be right, I could be wrong, or you could be wrong, I could be right, is something that is important. So I think being able to explain to people that our experiences as people are not the same. and certain things will compel you and certain things will not compel you. That is to say, what convinces me might not be what convinces you. And to assume that because what convinces you is going to convince me is God. So being able to explain to people that you could be wrong, they could be wrong, that is a possibility, so that they should recognize that yes, you might be wrong, they might also be wrong. And that's why it is the debate, right? And that's why you have split calls within the debate, right? So I think this sort of also lends back to the first thing I talked about, being respectful, right? So this is in recognition that we are flawed in one way or another. So we are not trying to prove ourselves right, we're not trying to prove ourselves wrong. And this is where it matters, because it would mean that you're not saying that these people are being delusional, or you're being delusional, or you're being maybe unruly or something of that sort. But it's just simply to recognize that it is it's not every time someone speaks that they're going to be right. And every time someone speaks, they're going to be wrong. So I think creating that shared sense of, I think, possibility of both people being right and wrong, I think in psychology is what we call a win-win situation. That is to recognize the disparities that could exist in understanding as key to understanding why certain goals might go differently and stuff like that. So being able to explain that to other people, and I think making them understand that this is something that is normal is also important, because I think maybe for some people that have not debated for or not debated many times, there are some patrons that are just very stubborn and hard headed and stuff like that. They'll think that you're maybe being biased, they'll think that you're maybe doing this, but being able to explain to them that these are common occurrences within debates and tournaments is something that is normal, and they should be able to understand that happens. So it means then you're able to calm them by just saying that you understand them, you might be wrong, but that's how you saw the debate, and it is something that is okay. I think if all that fails, in most cases, like I think I've told people this is that you are not the equity officer in such tournament. So if a team or a patron fails to understand, fails to agree with you, and you've tried to be respectful with them, you've tried to explain, and they don't want to understand, because you're not the equity officer, in most cases you refer them to the equity officer or the CS of the tournament. I think that is to say, it is not your burden to make everyone within the tournament happy. If they are not satisfied with whatever you've said and they have failed to understand your side, you respectfully refer them to people that are in charge, maybe OCO, maybe the what do you call them, the equity officers, the CS, because these are people that would be in position to handle such situations, because this has gone beyond your level. So there's no need for you to start fighting with teams, for you to start fighting with patrons as a judge. I think that is not in your place. So it means just refer them to the CA team, the equity team, and let them deal with it. And if you're invited, yeah, do the same thing. Be respectful, explain your side, they fail to agree, and that's it. You're not required to do any other thing that is beyond your abilities, because that is what you can do best. In most cases, in debates, I don't think I've ever seen any tournament where a judge has changed their decisions simply because a team has complained, or simply because a patron has protested and stuff like that. So in most cases, those things remain intact. And for my case, I usually invite them to, yeah, I use class forms. If they feel they're uncomfortable with me judging them in further rounds, that's very fine. We just speak to the CA, make sure the clash is registered with the equity so that they don't get to judge them, because that's the only way they get to protect themselves from me. if they think I'm a terrible judge. And that is something you should be fine with. And I think this is a problem with most novice judges. They think being clashed is something that may be bad, may be terrible. I think that's perfectly fine. If someone is uncomfortable with judging them, it should be perfectly okay. People should have their preferences and stuff like that. So I think generally that's how I usually handle very difficult teams in debate tournaments I've gone to. I've had a number of those experiences, and sometimes if they're unwilling to understand you've done all those things, I think just try to avoid them. And the best way is never to try have direct confrontation with those people. Try to avoid them as much as possible. So I think that's the only way you can have a good tournament, because if you have that, it's going to cause similar concerns with other patrons as well. Because, yeah, you know how we are relational creatures and commune and stuff like that. Talk about you, say things about you, which will not make this tournament experiences good for you as a judge. So I'll suggest, yeah, try to avoid them as much as possible, refer them to the PD if necessary. I think generally those are the tips that have over the years helped me adjudicate the tournaments I've been to. Um, I think that will be all for the session. I am now open to questions if there's specific questions. Otherwise, thank you for having me. I hope it was useful. Over to you, Perak. I don't know. Was I audible? Was I not? Because I'm not getting any feedback. Hope I was audible.